The alpha rejected her, and the forest itself went silent the moment she fell. Not because she was weak, but because something in her bond did not break the way it was supposed to. If a mate bond can survive rejection, what does that make the wolf who survives it? And if she ever returns, was she still meant to belong to the pack that erased her? There is a quiet truth that exists in every pack. The wolves who stand at the center of attention are rarely the ones who shape history. It is often the quiet ones, the overlooked ones, the ones people walk past without remembering their faces. In the Northern Valley pack there was one such girl. Most wolves knew the alpha. They knew the warriors who guarded the territory. They knew the noble families whose bloodlines were spoken of with pride. But the girl near the edge of the clearing that night, barely anyone knew her name. She had lived among them for years. Yet her presence was almost invisible, not because she tried to hide, but because no one thought to look. She worked where the pack needed hands, carrying water, preparing food for the training grounds, cleaning the meeting hall after ceremonies ended, tasks that kept the pack running, tasks that rarely earned gratitude. If someone had asked the warriors standing in the clearing that night who she was, many of them would have struggled to answer, not out of cruelty, simply because some people move through the world quietly enough to be forgotten. But quiet does not mean weak, and unnoticed does not mean unimportant. There are people who live their entire lives waiting to be seen, and there are others who learn something far more powerful. They learn to grow in silence. The girl had learned that lesson early. She had no parents in the pack, no family name that carried influence, no voice in the decisions made by elders. She was simply there, a presence on the edge of things. Yet there was something unusual about her, something the wolves around her could never quite explain. Animals in the forest behaved differently when she passed. The wind often shifted direction around her, and sometimes, when the moon was full, she felt a strange warmth in her chest. Not pain, not fear, just a quiet feeling that something inside her was awake, a feeling she had never shared with anyone, because when you grow up unnoticed, you learn to keep certain things to yourself. But what the pack did not realize was that silence can hide many things: strength, patience, and sometimes, destiny waiting for the right moment to reveal itself. The girl lifted her eyes toward the moon, for reasons she could not explain. That light had always felt familiar, as though it recognized her, as though it had been watching her life unfold long before this night began. Every pack has a story about how it began. Some are built on conquest, others on survival. But the wolves of the Northern Valley believed their history was built on something stronger than either: unity. For nearly a century their territory had remained stable. The borders held. The hunters returned each season with enough to feed the pack. Their enemies rarely tested the valley's strength for long. From the outside it appeared to be a perfect system. A powerful alpha at the top, loyal warriors guarding the land, families whose loyalty stretched back through generations. It was the kind of order wolves trust. The kind that feels permanent. But permanence is often an illusion created by routine. And routines only last until the night something unexpected happens. The Northern Valley pack had always been proud of its structure. At the heart of it stood the alpha's command. The alpha's voice settled disputes. The alpha's judgment decided punishment. The alpha's strength protected every wolf who lived within the valley's borders. For years that responsibility belonged to one wolf, Alpha Kale Ardent. His name carried weight far beyond the valley itself. Rogue wolves avoided his territory. Neighboring packs respected his leadership. Even the elders spoke of him as a leader shaped by discipline rather than impulse. He had not inherited the title easily. Years earlier he had earned it the way wolves always have. Through challenge. Through strength. Through a battle witnessed by the entire pack beneath the same moon that now hung above the clearing. And when the previous alpha stepped down, there had been little doubt about who would take the throne. Kale had proven himself capable of command. Calm when others panicked. Strategic when others reacted. Strong enough to lead warriors twice his age. Under his rule, the valley prospered. Territories expanded. Alliances strengthened. And slowly something else happened. The pack began to trust him completely. Because leadership is not just about strength. It is about certainty. Wolves follow leaders who appear certain, even when those leaders are facing decisions they themselves do not fully understand. Tonight was supposed to be one of those decisions. The pack believed they knew why they had gathered. They believed they knew what the alpha would announce. For months, quiet discussions had traveled through the territory. Rumors of a political alliance. A Luna chosen from a powerful neighboring bloodline. A union that would strengthen the valley's influence across the northern mountains. It made sense. Powerful leaders think about the future. And alliances are one of the oldest tools in wolf politics. Many of the wolves standing in the clearing had already accepted this outcome. Some even celebrated it. Because when an alpha chooses a Luna from another strong bloodline, the pack grows stronger. More allies. More protection. More influence. That was the logic. Clear. Strategic. Reasonable. But logic is not the force that governs the ancient bond between mates. That bond answers to something older than strategy. Something wolves cannot negotiate with. Something they cannot rewrite once it appears. Yet most wolves standing in the clearing that night had never seen a true mate bond reveal itself. They knew the stories. But stories often feel distant until the moment they unfold in front of you. Alpha Kale stood at the center of the stone platform, his posture steady beneath the moonlight. His cloak moved slightly with the wind. Below him, hundreds of wolves waited. No one spoke. Ceremonies like this command silence. Respect. Attention. Because the words spoken from the Alpha's platform shaped the pack's future. Kale looked out across the clearing. Warriors stood to his right. Elders near the front. Families gathered behind them. Every face turned toward him with expectation. A leader learns to read crowds the same way hunters read tracks. And tonight, the message in front of him was clear. The pack trusted his decision. They believed he would strengthen their future. They believed the ceremony would unfold exactly the way tradition promised. But leadership often means standing at the center of expectations while feeling something different beneath the surface. Something unsettled. Something unexpected. For a brief moment, Alpha Kale's gaze moved across the gathering slowly. Observing. Measuring. Then his eyes paused. Only for an instant. At the far edge of the clearing, near the trees, the girl still stood there, quiet, unnoticed, watching the ceremony from a distance. Her expression was calm, though the strange warmth in her chest had not faded. If anything, it had grown stronger. She did not know why her eyes kept drifting toward the platform, why the Alpha's presence felt different tonight. But some instincts cannot be explained. They simply arrive, and they wait. Across the clearing, Kale looked away again. The moment passed, yet something about it lingered. Leaders learn to ignore small distractions during important ceremonies. There are too many responsibilities to consider, too many expectations resting on their decisions. And tonight, Alpha Kale believed he already understood the path he was meant to take. The alliance. The Luna chosen for strategy rather than emotion. The future he had prepared for. It was a practical decision. A wise one. The kind elders approve of. But there is an old truth known among wolves who have lived long enough. Destiny rarely asks whether a decision is practical. Pause. The moon rose higher above the clearing. Its silver light spread across the gathered wolves like a quiet reminder of the forces older than any alpha's authority. And somewhere within that crowd, a bond had begun to awaken. Still faint. Still unnoticed by most. But growing stronger with every passing second. Because the ceremony the pack believed they were witnessing was not the one that was about to unfold. And what Alpha Kale did not yet understand was that before a crown can shape a future, the moon must first reveal who it has chosen. And the moon had already begun to speak. Ceremonies inside a wolf pack follow traditions older than memory. Long before the valley had a name. Long before the current alpha was born. Wolves gathered beneath the moon to witness the same ritual. The claiming of a mate. It is not a quiet event. It is not private. Among wolves, a bond between mates belongs to the entire pack, because that bond determines the future leadership of every wolf who lives under that alpha's protection. The Luna does not simply stand beside the alpha. She stabilizes the pack. She calms disputes. She strengthens the alpha's authority. Without her, leadership is incomplete. That is why ceremonies like this carry so much weight. And that is why the clearing had filled with wolves long before the moon reached its highest point. One by one they had arrived from every corner of the territory. Hunters returning from the forest paths. Warriors leaving the training grounds. Families emerging from the pack houses built along the valley's ridge. By the time the torches were lit, the meeting ground had become a circle of quiet anticipation. No one wanted to miss the moment. Because when an alpha chooses his Luna, the entire pack becomes witness to destiny. Or at least, that is what wolves believe. The stone platform stood at the center of the clearing, elevated just high enough for the alpha to be seen from every angle. Behind it, the ancient throne waited, carved from rock and reinforced with iron bands by generations of pack craftsmen. A throne built not for comfort, but for permanence. Tonight that throne stood empty, because this ceremony did not require the Alpha to sit. It required him to stand. Alpha Kale remained at the front edge of the platform, his posture calm, his gaze steady across the wolves gathered before him. His presence filled the clearing with authority. Wolves straightened when he looked in their direction. Others lowered their eyes in respect. The bond between Alpha and Pack is rarely spoken about, but it is always felt. It moves quietly through the air whenever a leader stands before his wolves. A mixture of loyalty, expectation, and instinct. And tonight that feeling was stronger than usual, because everyone believed they were about to witness something important. The warriors closest to the platform exchanged brief glances. Some nodded toward the group of visiting wolves standing along the far edge of the clearing. Yes, members of a neighboring pack who had arrived earlier that evening. Their presence had not gone unnoticed, and in the quiet language of pack politics, their attendance suggested something significant. Alliances are rarely spoken of openly. They are arranged through gestures, through ceremonies, through decisions that signal strength. Many wolves believed tonight's claim would confirm such an alliance. It was the logical outcome, the kind of decision a leader like Kale would make. Practical, strategic, beneficial to the pack's long-term stability. Those whispers had traveled through the territory for weeks. So when the torches were lit and the Alpha called the pack together beneath the moon, few doubted what they were about to see. But ceremonies often unfold differently than the crowd expects, because there is another force that occasionally interrupts even the most carefully planned events. The mate bond. It cannot be negotiated. It cannot be delayed. And when it awakens, it does not ask permission. At the far edge of the clearing, the girl remained near the trees. The torchlight barely reached her position. She stood slightly behind the outer ring of wolves, careful not to block anyone's view. That was a habit she had learned long ago. Take up little space. Stay out of the way. Watch quietly. Most of the wolves around her focused on the platform, their attention fixed on the Alpha. No one noticed the subtle tension building in her posture. No one noticed the way her breathing had slowed. And no one heard the faint shift beneath the surface of her thoughts. Her wolf had awakened. Not fully. Just enough to make its presence known. A quiet awareness moving through her chest like warmth spreading beneath the skin. The girl pressed her hand lightly against her ribs. Confused. This sensation had appeared before during full moons. But never this strong. Never this clear. She looked toward the platform again. Toward Alpha Kale. And the moment her eyes found him, the warmth surged. Stronger now. Sharpened by something she could not name. Across the clearing, Kale remained still. He had begun speaking to the pack, his voice calm and steady as he acknowledged the gathering. The words carried easily across the clearing. Measured. Confident. But somewhere beneath that composure, another awareness had begun to surface. At first it was subtle. A faint pull. Almost like the sensation of being watched. Kale paused briefly between sentences. His gaze moved across the crowd. Hundreds of wolves stood before him. Loyal. Expectant. Yet the feeling remained. A quiet tension at the edge of his senses. Something unfamiliar. He ignored it. Leaders learn quickly that distractions can weaken authority during ceremonies. And tonight required clarity. The pack expected him to complete the ritual. To choose. To claim. But instincts have a way of returning when least convenient. The warmth in the girl's chest intensified again. Her wolf stirred more strongly now. Not restless. Not aggressive. Just aware. As if it had finally recognized something it had been searching for. Her breathing caught for a moment. And without realizing it, she took a small step forward. The wolves around her barely noticed. Their attention remained fixed on the platform. On the Alpha. On the ceremony unfolding before them. But inside her chest, the warmth shifted into something sharper. A connection. A thread pulling gently in one direction. Toward the stone platform. Toward the Alpha. She blinked slowly, trying to understand the sensation. Across the clearing, Kale's voice faded for a fraction of a second. Only long enough for him to notice the strange awareness returning again. Stronger this time. Like a distant echo inside his mind. He looked across the gathering once more. And this time his gaze paused longer near the edge of the clearing. Near the trees. Near the girl. Their eyes met briefly. Only a moment. But it was enough. The bond flared between them like a sudden spark. invisible to every wolf in the clearing, but unmistakable to the two who felt it. The girl inhaled sharply. Her wolf responded instantly. Alive now. Alert. The warmth in her chest became certainty. A certainty every wolf understands the moment it appears. The bond. The ancient connection chosen by the moon itself. Her heart pounded as realization settled slowly into place. The alpha was her mate. Across the clearing, Kale felt it too. Not as clearly. Not yet. But the awareness lingered in his chest like a question he had not expected to ask. For the first time since stepping onto the platform, his composure wavered. Only slightly, but enough to slow his next words. The pack noticed nothing unusual. From their perspective, the ceremony continued as planned. But within the silence between the alpha's sentences, something had begun to change. Because the moment a mate bond appears, everything that follows must answer to it. Even decisions already made. Even alliances carefully arranged. The girl stood frozen where she was. Her thoughts racing. Every wolf grows up hearing stories about the bond. Stories about the moment two souls recognize each other. But those stories never explain how overwhelming the moment feels when it actually happens. The certainty. The pull. The quiet voice inside the wolf whispering the same truth again and again. Mate. She looked toward the platform once more. Toward the alpha. Toward the man who now stood at the center of the ceremony meant to choose the pack's future Luna. And in that moment, a single thought crossed her mind. A simple hope. The kind that rises naturally when destiny reveals itself. Because every wolf dreams of hearing those words. The words that confirm the bond. The words that transform two lives into one path. Mine. She waited. The pack waited. The alpha lifted his head beneath the moonlight. And for a brief moment, the entire clearing seemed to hold its breath. But something about the silence felt different now. Not louder. Not dramatic. Just slightly unsettled. Because while the girl now understood the truth the bond had revealed, the alpha had not yet spoken. And sometimes, the most important moments in a wolf's life arrive quietly, right before everything begins to go wrong. Moments of truth rarely announce themselves. They arrive quietly. Sometimes hidden inside ceremonies meant to celebrate unity. Sometimes beneath the calm voice of a leader who believes he understands the path ahead. The clearing remained still beneath the moon. Torches flickered gently along the ring of ancient trees. The entire pack stood waiting for the final words of the ceremony. From their perspective, nothing unusual had happened. The alpha stood before them. The night was calm. Tradition was unfolding exactly as it always had. But for two wolves in that clearing, something had already changed. At the edge of the crowd, the girl stood frozen in place. The bond within her chest had awakened fully now. It was no longer a quiet warmth. It was certainty. The kind of certainty that does not ask questions. It simply reveals the truth. Her wolf recognized it instantly. Mate. The word echoed through her mind with a clarity she had never experienced before. She felt it in every breath, every heartbeat. A pull guiding her forward. Not demanding. Not violent. Just steady. As if the moon itself were gently pointing the way. Across the clearing, Alpha Kale felt something as well. Not as clearly. Not with the same clarity that filled the girl's thoughts. But the awareness remained there. A presence at the edge of his instincts. Leaders learn to trust their instincts. But they also learn to control them. Because leadership is rarely about emotion. It is about decisions. About choosing what strengthens the pack. About maintaining order. And tonight, Kale believed he had already chosen the path that would secure the valley's future. The alliance. The Luna selected from a respected neighboring bloodline. A union that would bind two territories together. It was the kind of decision elders admire. The kind warriors accept without question. The kind of decision that protects a pack from threats beyond its borders. From the platform, Kale looked out across the gathered wolves once more. His voice had grown quieter as he spoke. Not uncertain. Just measured. The ceremony was reaching its final moment. Below him, the wolves waited with steady patience. Among them stood the visiting pack whose presence confirmed the rumors whispered across the valley. A political alliance. A Luna chosen for strength of lineage. A future arranged through wisdom rather than instinct. That was the story everyone believed they were watching unfold. But the ancient bond between mates does not always respect plans. The girl took another small step forward. Then another. The pull within her chest grew stronger with each movement. Some of the wolves near her shifted slightly to make space. Their attention remained focused on the platform. None of them realized what was happening. None of them understood the meaning behind the quiet movement through the crowd. But deep within her chest, the girl's wolf urged her forward, closer, toward the alpha, toward the bond the moon had revealed. Her footsteps slowed as she reached the front of the gathered wolves. The torchlight finally touched her face. A few members of the pack glanced toward her now, confused by her sudden presence so close to the platform. Some whispered quietly to one another. Others frowned, trying to remember who she was. But curiosity is not the same as understanding. And none of them yet realized what they were about to witness. On the platform, Cale noticed the movement. His gaze shifted downward. For a moment, his eyes met hers again. This time the bond struck with undeniable force. Sharp, immediate, impossible to ignore. The alpha inhaled slowly. There it was. The connection. The ancient recognition wolves speak about in quiet stories. The truth settled into his instincts instantly. Yet something else moved through his thoughts at the same time. Responsibility. Expectation. The alliance. The future he had prepared. The pack watching him now. Hundreds of wolves standing in silence, waiting for him to confirm the decision they believed had already been made. Leadership is often praised for its strength. But what few wolves discuss openly is the weight it places on the one who carries it. Every decision echoes through the lives of others. Every choice shapes the future of the pack. And sometimes, those choices arrive at the worst possible moment. The clearing fell completely silent. The girl stood at the base of the platform, her heart racing beneath the steady pull of the bond. Hope flickered quietly inside her. Not loud. Not desperate. Just the simple belief that the truth the moon had revealed would be honored. Because every wolf grows up believing one thing about the mate bond. It cannot be denied. The alpha looked down at her. The bond was clear now. His wolf recognized it. His instincts understood it. Yet the thoughts moving through his mind were not the same ones guiding the girl's heart. He looked beyond her. Toward the visiting wolves. Toward the elders who had supported his decision. Toward the future he had already promised. For a brief moment, uncertainty moved across his expression. Only briefly. Then it faded. Because leaders are trained to trust the decisions they have already made. Cale straightened slightly. The clearing remained silent. Every wolf waited. The girl looked up at him, her breath shallow with anticipation. This was the moment. The moment when destiny would be spoken aloud. The moment when the bond would be confirmed before the pack. The moment when the future would begin. And then the alpha spoke. I, Alpha Cale, reject you. The words fell into the clearing like stones dropped into still water. For a second, no one moved. No one spoke. The silence stretched across the clearing as though the entire pack needed time to understand what they had just heard. Then the whispers began. Confused, shocked, disbelieving. Gasps moved through the crowd in quiet waves. Wolves turned toward one another, searching for explanation in each other's faces. Because what had just happened was something few of them had ever witnessed. A mate bond, rejected. The girl did not move. At first, the words did not fully reach her. Her mind struggled to accept what her ears had heard. Reject. The bond inside her chest trembled. Her wolf recoiled in pain. The certainty that had filled her moments earlier fractured suddenly. Not slowly. Instantly. Her knees weakened beneath her. The ground rose to meet her as the strength left her body. She collapsed at the foot of the platform. Around her, the whispers grew louder. Some wolves looked away. Others stared openly. The visiting pack members remained still, their expressions carefully neutral. On the platform, Alpha Cale stood rigid beneath the moonlight. The bond had not disappeared. Rejected mates do not simply stop feeling it. They learn to live with the wound. Because some injuries are not made by claws. They are created by words. Words spoken in front of witnesses. Words that echo through memory long after the moment has passed. The girl lay on the ground, her breathing shallow, her thoughts fractured by disbelief. Her wolf trembled beneath the surface of her mind. Confused. The bond still existed. But now it carried a different weight. The weight of rejection. Around the clearing, the pack struggled to process what they had just seen. Some wolves avoided looking at the girl. Others stared openly at the alpha. None of them spoke loudly enough to break the strange quiet that had settled over the gathering. Because humiliation has a presence of its own. It fills a space differently than anger or violence. It leaves witnesses unsure how to respond. And in moments like this, silence often becomes the loudest reaction of all. Above them, the moon remained unchanged. Cold. bright, watching the clearing with the same distant patience it had shown for centuries. Because the moon reveals bonds. But it does not control the choices wolves make afterward. And sometimes, those choices shape a future far more deeply than anyone in the clearing could yet understand. There is an old lesson passed quietly through wolf packs. A lesson elders rarely explain fully. Humiliation changes people. It reshapes them. It plants something deep within the heart that does not disappear easily. Sometimes that change leads to strength. Sometimes it leads to something else entirely. But one truth remains constant. The wolves who witnessed that moment would remember it for the rest of their lives. Not because of the ceremony. Not because of the alpha's authority. But because they had seen a bond rejected beneath the full moon. And in that clearing, as the girl lay motionless at the base of the platform, a question had quietly entered the story. A question no one yet knew how to answer. What happens to a wolf after the moment their destiny is taken away in front of the entire pack? History often remembers the moment a choice is made. But it rarely remembers the silence that follows it. In the clearing of the Northern Valley pack, that silence lingered longer than anyone expected. The torches still burned. The moon still cast its silver light across the gathering. Yet something about the ceremony had shifted in a way that no tradition had prepared them for. A mate bond had been rejected. And now the pack stood between two forces they did not fully understand. Tradition and authority. Because in a wolf pack, the alpha's word is final. Even when that word challenges instinct. Even when it challenges destiny. Alpha Kale remained standing on the stone platform, his posture firm despite the unease moving quietly through the crowd. From where he stood, he could see every face in the clearing. Warriors who had fought beside him. Elders who had advised him. Families who trusted his leadership. Their expressions carried confusion. Not rebellion. Just uncertainty. Wolves had heard stories of rejected mates. But stories are distant things. They exist somewhere beyond daily life. Seeing such a moment unfold before their eyes was different. It forced every wolf present to confront a difficult truth. If an alpha could reject destiny, then what guided the future of the pack? But Kale had already made his decision. And the reasoning behind that decision was not hidden. It had been discussed quietly among elders for months. The Northern Valley pack stood strong. But strength alone does not secure the future. Alliances do. Beyond the mountains to the east lived another powerful pack. Older. Larger. Their bloodline carried influence across several territories. An alliance with them would bring protection against rival packs. Shared hunting grounds. Political stability. And the alliance required one thing. A union. A Luna chosen not by instinct, but by strategy. Among wolves, this kind of decision is not unheard of. Leaders sometimes choose what strengthens the pack rather than what satisfies the heart. History has recorded many such choices. Kings have made them. Generals have made them. And sometimes, those decisions reshape entire nations. In the center of the clearing, the girl remained on the ground where she had fallen. Few wolves looked directly at her now. Not out of cruelty, but because witnessing another's humiliation carries a quiet discomfort. Some turned their attention back toward the platform, toward the alpha, toward the ceremony that still had to continue. Because tradition demands completion, even when something has gone wrong. Kale lifted his hands slightly. The movement was small, but it was enough. The murmurs moving through the crowd faded once again. Silence returned to the clearing. Then, slowly, another figure stepped forward. She had been standing near the visiting pack members along the edge of the gathering. Tall, composed, dressed in ceremonial silver that reflected the moonlight with quiet elegance. Her presence alone carried authority. This was Lyra Valen, daughter of the Eastern Ridge Alpha, a wolf raised among leaders, trained in diplomacy, prepared for the responsibilities of a Luna long before arriving in the Northern Valley. For weeks, the rumors surrounding her visit had traveled quietly through the territory. And now the truth stood clearly before the pack. This had always been the plan. The alliance. The union between two powerful bloodlines. The future secured through strategy rather than instinct. Lyra approached the platform with calm confidence. Not hurried. Not hesitant. She had expected this moment. She climbed the steps and stopped beside Alpha Kale beneath the full moon. The contrast between the two women in the clearing was impossible to ignore. One stood tall on the platform, cloaked in ceremony and influence. The other remained on the ground below, her presence slowly fading from the attention of the crowd. In that moment, the difference between power and obscurity became painfully clear. Kale looked out across the pack once more. His voice carried across the clearing when he spoke again. Steady. Certain. He announced the alliance. He acknowledged the strength of the Eastern Ridge Pack. He spoke of unity, protection, and a future shared between territories. Each word was measured carefully. Each sentence designed to reassure the wolves standing before him. And slowly, the tension in the clearing began to shift. Some of the warriors nodded. Others exchanged approving glances. The elders at the front of the gathering relaxed visibly. Because from their perspective, the Alpha had made the correct decision. A strategic union. A stronger future. A leader placing the pack above personal instinct. Soon, the first voices of approval appeared. Then more followed. A low ripple of celebration moved through the gathering. Not loud. Not wild. But enough to signal acceptance. Because wolves understand something fundamental about leadership. The survival of the pack often requires difficult choices. And the Alpha had chosen the crown. Chosen the responsibility of leadership over the bond the moon had revealed. High above the clearing, the moon remained silent. Unchanged. Watching the ceremony continue. Watching the pack accept the decision placed before them. Watching as the moment that had shattered one life slowly transformed into a celebration for another. But there is a quiet truth about power that few leaders speak aloud. Kings often forget something important. The crown they protect can also become the blade that ends them. Because every decision carries consequences. Even the ones that appear wise at the time. Down below the platform, the girl slowly pushed herself upright. The world around her felt distant. The sounds of celebration reached her ears as though traveling through water. Her chest still ached where the bond had been rejected. Rejected, but not erased. That pain remained. Sure. Unfamiliar. Her wolf lay silent inside her mind now. Not broken. Just withdrawn. As though waiting for something the girl herself could not yet understand. No one noticed when she finally stood. The pack's attention had returned to the platform. To the Alpha and the Luna chosen for alliance. To the future they believed had just been secured. So quietly, the girl stepped backward. What? Then again. The torchlight faded as she moved closer to the tree line. No voices called after her. No eyes followed her path. Within seconds, the shadows of the forest welcomed her completely. And the clearing continued celebrating. The Alpha stood beside his chosen Luna. The alliance had been confirmed. The pack believed stability had been preserved. But history often hides its most important moments in places people forget to watch. Like the edge of a forest. Where a rejected wolf disappears beneath the trees. Where humiliation begins to harden into something else. Something quiet. Something patient. Because sometimes the stories that shape the future of a pack do not continue in the clearing. They continue in the dark paths beyond it. And on that night, while the Northern Valley Pack celebrated their Alpha's decision, the girl they had just witnessed fall beneath the platform walked alone into the forest. No one followed. No one asked where she was going. But years later, many of those same wolves would remember that moment differently. They would remember the silence that surrounded her departure. They would remember how easily the pack turned its attention back to celebration. And they would wonder about something none of them had considered that night. What happens to a wolf when the pack they serve decides they no longer matter? The forest beyond the Northern Valley clearing had witnessed countless pack ceremonies. Victories. Oaths. Claims of loyalty. But that night, it witnessed something far quieter. A single wolf walking away from everything she had known. The sounds of celebration faded quickly once she passed beyond the torchlight. Laughter. Music. The rise of voices praising the Alpha's decision. All of it dissolved into the distance until the forest returned to its natural stillness. Branches moved gently under the night wind. Owls called somewhere high above. And beneath the full moon, the rejected girl walked without direction. Each step felt heavier than the last. The mate bond rejection had done what few physical wounds ever could. It had reached inside her. Not just the body, but the spirit that connected wolf to wolf. Her breathing came slowly. Uneven. Her wolf remained silent within her mind. Not gone, but withdrawn to a place she could not reach. Many wolves believe the pain of rejection ends quickly. That the bond breaks and life simply continues. But the truth is different. The bond between mates is one of the oldest connections in the wolf world. When it is accepted, it strengthens both wolves. When it is denied, the body must fight to survive the loss. The girl stumbled as she moved deeper into the forest. Her knees hit the ground. Cold earth pressed against her palms. For a moment she stayed there, breathing slowly, trying to steady the pain spreading through her chest. Above her, the moon hung quietly in the sky. Watching. Not judging. Just present. She lifted her eyes toward it. Wolves have always believed the moon sees everything. Or betrayal. In moments like this one, where a life changes direction without warning, the girl tried to stand again. But the strength left her legs. She collapsed against the roots of an ancient tree, her body trembling with exhaustion. Hours passed. The night grew deeper. The forest moved through its usual rhythms. Creatures hunting. Leaves shifting under small paws. Wind traveling between branches. And slowly, the scent of a wounded wolf spread through the trees. Wild wolves are drawn to weakness. It is part of nature's balance. Within the darkness, shadows began to move. One wolf appeared first. Then another. Lean bodies emerged quietly between the trees. Not members of the Northern Valley pack. These were rogues. Wolves who lived beyond pack law. Wolves who survived by instinct alone. They circled slowly, carefully. Their eyes reflected the moonlight as they studied the figure resting against the tree. To them she looked like something already claimed by death. A lone wolf. Weak. Unprotected. Easy prey. The girl felt their presence before she fully saw them. Her instincts, though weakened, still recognized danger. She tried to move, but her muscles refused. Her breathing became shallow. The rogues moved closer. One stepped forward, lowering its head slightly as it studied her. A low growl rolled through the clearing. Not loud. Just enough to signal the beginning of a hunt. Moments like this happen often in the wild. The strong survive. The weak become part of the forest. It is a law older than any pack. The wolves closed in, slowly, cautiously, until they formed a loose circle around her. The girl closed her eyes. Not in surrender, but because she no longer had the strength to fight. Inside her mind, the silence of her wolf remained. Yet something else stirred beneath that silence. Something ancient. Something that had been waiting far longer than she realized. High above the forest, the moon brightened slightly as the clouds shifted across the sky. Silver light poured through the branches. It fell directly upon the clearing where she lay. The rogues hesitated. Animals often react to changes humans barely notice. The forest had grown quieter. The air felt different. So heavy. As though the night itself had paused to observe what was about to happen. The girl's breathing slowed. Her body, moments away from collapse, began responding to something deeper than instinct. A faint glow spread across the ground where the moonlight touched her skin. Not bright. Not dramatic. But unmistakable. The rogue stepped back slightly. Their ears lowered. Their bodies shifted into defensive stances. They could sense something unfamiliar. Something older than pack hierarchy. Older than the laws that governed wolves. Within the girl's chest, the damaged bond did not vanish. Instead, it changed. The pain remained. But beneath it, another force awakened. One that had nothing to do with Alpha Kale. Nothing to do with rejection. Nothing to do with the pack she had left behind. Her fingers tightened slowly against the soil. Her breathing steadied. Inside her mind, the silence finally broke. Not with the voice of her wolf, but with something far deeper. A presence. Calm. Ancient. Watching. Waiting. For the first time since the ceremony, her eyes opened again. The rogues standing around her took another step back. They could not explain why. Animals rarely understand ancient power. They only recognize when something in front of them no longer belongs to the natural order they know. The girl slowly lifted her head toward the moon. Silver light reflected in her eyes. For a moment, the forest seemed to hold its breath. Because something had changed. Not violently. Not loudly. But in a way that would shape events far beyond that clearing. Far beyond the night of rejection. The rogues did not attack. Instead, one by one they retreated. First slowly. Then more quickly. Until the clearing returned to silence once again. The girl remained leaning against the tree. Alive. Barely conscious. But alive. And above her, the moon continued its quiet watch over the forest. There is an old belief shared among wolves. A belief passed through generations long before modern packs formed their territories. It says that the moon does not choose wolves at random. And once it marks one, it does not abandon them. Many dismiss such stories as myth. Legends told to young wolves during long winter nights. But sometimes, A single night in the forest raises questions even the elders cannot answer, because the pack believed the rejected girl had disappeared into darkness. By morning, some would even believe she had died beyond their borders, lost to the wilderness, forgotten by fate. But the forest knew otherwise, and the moon had only just begun watching her story unfold. By the time the first light of morning touched the forest, the clearing where she had collapsed looked almost untouched. The rogues had vanished. The night wind had brushed away most signs of movement. Only the faint imprint in the soil showed where a young wolf had fought to stay alive. She remained beneath the ancient tree, her body still, her breathing shallow but steady. From a distance, anyone passing through the forest might have believed the same thing many in the pack would soon believe, that she had not survived the night. And yet, life continued quietly within her. The human body can endure more than many expect. But what sustained her in that moment was not simply endurance. Something else had awakened. Something older than the bond that had been rejected. The first rays of sunlight filtered through the tall branches above. They crossed her face slowly as the forest began its morning chorus. Birds stirred in the canopy. Insects moved through the grass. The world resumed its rhythm. And slowly, the girl opened her eyes again. Confusion came first. The memory of the ceremony returned in fragments. The alpha's voice. The gasps of the pack. The words that had severed the bond. She expected the same emptiness to greet her when she reached inward for her wolf. But the silence from before had changed. It was no longer absence. It was depth. Like standing near the edge of a vast lake whose bottom could not be seen. Her breathing steadied as she tried to understand what she was feeling. Wolves are born connected to their inner nature. They recognize the presence of their wolf the same way they recognize their own heartbeat. But this sensation was different. Stronger. Ancient. It did not feel like something newly formed. It felt like something that had been waiting patiently for the moment it could no longer remain hidden. Far away in the Northern Valley territory, the pack had already begun spreading its version of events. Stories travel quickly among wolves. By morning, many believed the rejected girl had run too far into the wilderness. Too weak to survive. Too alone to find her way back. A quiet conclusion had already been accepted. She had died somewhere beyond the border. A tragic outcome. But not one that would interrupt the pack's future. The alliance between Northern Valley and Eastern Ridge continued moving forward. Preparations for the Alpha's new Luna began. Life within the territory returned to order. But history has a habit of revealing truths long after decisions have been made. And sometimes, those truths begin with a single detail no one thought important at the time. The girl resting beneath the tree had never spoken much about her past. Most wolves in the pack only knew fragments. She had arrived in the territory years earlier. Young. Quiet. Without parents or family beside her. The elders accepted her as a wandering wolf seeking a home. The Northern Valley pack had always welcomed those willing to follow their laws. So she was given a place among them. A chance to grow within the pack. But very few asked deeper questions. Where had she come from before arriving at their borders? Why had she been alone? And why had the oldest wolves sometimes studied her with quiet curiosity? Because long before the Northern Valley pack was formed, before Alpha Kale was born, before the alliances and rivalries that defined modern territories, there existed stories told only in the oldest circles of wolf lore. Stories about bloodlines connected directly to the moon itself. Rare wolves whose connection to lunar power ran deeper than the bond shared by ordinary pack members. They were not rulers in the traditional sense. Not leaders chosen through strength or dominance. But something different. Guardians of an older balance between wolves and the forces that guided them. These wolves were known by many names across different territories. But one name appeared most often in the oldest records. Moonblood. A lineage believed to have faded centuries ago. Lost through time. Or hidden among ordinary packs where no one would recognize it. Legends describe them as wolves whose power awakened only after surviving great hardship. Moments where fate stripped everything away. Identity. Belonging. Even the bond meant to complete them. Only then would the deeper nature of their blood reveal itself. For most wolves, such stories were nothing more than distant myths. Something spoken during long winters to pass the time. Yet beneath the ancient tree the girl slowly sat upright. Her movements felt unfamiliar. Not painful. Just different. Her senses sharpened with sudden clarity. The rustle of leaves several yards away reached her ears. The scent of damp earth filled her lungs with unexpected intensity. She lifted her hand toward the light breaking through the branches. For a moment she simply watched it. Watched how the sunlight moved across her skin. Inside her chest, the strange new presence grew stronger. Not aggressive. Not overwhelming. Just steady. Like a heartbeat that had always been there but had only now become noticeable. Fragments of memory surfaced. Things her mother had once told her before they were separated years ago. Quiet warnings. Advice she had never fully understood at the time. Her mother had spoken carefully about their family. About why they moved often. Why they avoided drawing attention from other packs. Why secrecy mattered more than status. The girl had believed those words were simply caution. A mother protecting her child. But now, sitting alone beneath the ancient tree, she began to understand something else. Those warnings had not been about fear. They had been about protection. Protection from a truth too large to reveal too early. Her breathing deepened. The forest around her felt strangely responsive. Animals nearby remained still. Not frightened. Just aware. As though they recognized something within her that ordinary wolves did not carry. High above the forest, the sun climbed slowly into the sky. But even in daylight, the quiet presence of the moon seemed to linger within her awareness. An echo of the connection that had awakened during the night. Far away in the Northern Valley territory, Alpha Kale believed he had secured the future of his pack. He had chosen strength, alliance, political stability. He had rejected what he believed was a simple mate bond. A complication that threatened his carefully planned future. But destiny does not always reveal its value in the moment it appears. Sometimes its importance becomes clear only after it has been pushed away. Beneath the forest canopy, the girl slowly rose to her feet. The weakness that had nearly claimed her hours earlier had begun to fade. Her body adjusted to the new energy moving through it. Step by step, she walked forward through the trees. Not running. Not hiding. Just moving. For the first time since the ceremony, her wolf stirred fully within her mind. But it no longer felt like a wounded companion. It felt powerful. Alert. Awake in a way she had never experienced before. Because something fundamental had changed during the night. The rejection that should have broken her had opened something else. And somewhere far beyond the forest, beyond the territories of both Northern Valley and Eastern Ridge, old stories waited quietly for their return. Stories about wolves who carried the moon in their blood. Stories about power that did not answer to crowns or alliances. Stories about what happens when a pack turns away the very wolf fate intended to reshape its future. The pack believed they had rejected a mate. But fate had rejected their alpha. And deep within the forest, the first steps of a transformation had already begun. Time does not move the same way for those who disappear from their past. In the Northern Valley pack, life continued under the structure of leadership and tradition. The alpha's rule remained firm. The alliance with the Eastern Ridge pack strengthened territorial influence. New patrol routes were established. Borders became more secure. And gradually, the memory of a rejected mate faded into something rarely spoken of. Not because it was forgotten, but because packs survive by focusing on what lies ahead, not what has already passed. Yet in the deep forest beyond their territory, time moved differently. There were no ceremonies there. No expectations. No titles. Only survival. Years passed in silence. The forest changed with the seasons, yet remained the same in its indifference. Rain fell and returned to the earth. Snow covered the ground and melted away. Animals were born. Animals disappeared. And within that constant cycle of life and death, a single figure remained. At first she was simply surviving. Learning how to move through the forest without attracting attention. Learning which paths were safe. Which plants could sustain her. Which sounds meant danger. The early days were the hardest. Not because of enemies, but because of limitation. The body remembers rejection differently than the mind. It takes time for strength to return. Time for instinct to stabilize. Time for the bond, though broken in name, to settle into something new within her. But the forest does not wait for healing. It demands adaptation. Slowly she learned. Hunting began with mistakes. Missed opportunities. Failed attempts. Long periods of exhaustion after running through terrain she was not yet strong enough to master. But wolves learn differently when they are alone. There is no pack to rely on. No alpha to guide decisions. Every choice carries consequence. Every failure must be survived immediately. In that environment, weakness is not tolerated. It is corrected. Or it is ended. Over time, something shifted within her movements. Her steps became quieter. Her senses sharper. her awareness of the forest deeper than before. She began to anticipate motion before it occurred, to recognize patterns in the way prey moved through the trees, to understand how wind carried scent across different elevations. It was not training in the traditional sense. There was no teacher, only experience, and the relentless discipline of survival. The memory of the pack remained distant, not in detail, but in feeling. The rejection had created a fracture within her past life, a clear separation between what she had been and what she was becoming. At times, she would stop beneath the open sky and feel the presence within her chest. That same awareness that had awakened during the night of collapse beneath the ancient tree. It had not disappeared. It had evolved. No longer uncertain. No longer fragile. It responded to her movements now, as though it had begun to understand her as she learned to understand it. Years do not announce themselves when they pass in isolation. There are no witnesses, no records, only change. One season blending into another until the past becomes something difficult to measure. The girl who had once been rejected was no longer a girl in the same sense. Her body had strengthened. Her instincts refined. Her presence in the forest no longer carried hesitation. Even the predators that once circled her with confidence now avoided direct confrontation. Not because she had become dominant in the traditional sense, but because something about her no longer matched the expectations of weakness. She no longer moved like prey. And the forest recognizes that difference without needing explanation. There were moments when she encountered other wolves. Rogues passing through territories. Solitary hunters navigating the edges of pack lands. Those encounters were brief, measured. Most ended without conflict. Some ended with distance maintained on both sides. Because instinct speaks faster than understanding. An instinct told them she did not belong to the ordinary category of lone wolves. She did not carry the scent of a pack. But she also did not carry the vulnerability of abandonment. She existed somewhere between definitions. Unclassified. Unknown. During one winter, she learned to navigate snow-covered terrain that erased familiar landmarks. During one summer, she learned to track prey through dense foliage where scent behaved unpredictably. During storms, she learned patience. During silence, she learned control. Control became the most important transformation of all. Not control over the forest, but control over herself. The presence within her chest no longer surged unpredictably. It responded to intention, to focus, to awareness. There were moments when she could feel it align with the environment around her, as though the forest itself reacted differently to her existence now. But she never questioned it too deeply. Survival leaves little space for philosophical reflection. There is only movement forward, only adaptation, only the next day. Yet beneath everything she learned, one truth remained constant. The memory of rejection had not weakened her. It had reshaped her. Pain does not always destroy what it touches. Sometimes it removes everything unnecessary, leaving only what cannot be broken. Far away within the Northern Valley Pack, the name of the girl faded from conversation. New generations grew without witnessing the night of the ceremony. The Alpha continued his leadership. The alliance remained intact. And life progressed as it always does in structured societies. But in the deeper parts of the forest, something else was unfolding. A transformation without audience. A growth without recognition. A becoming that required no approval. Only time. And endurance. And as the years passed, the girl who once collapsed beneath a platform of judgment learned something few ever discover. That survival is not the end of a story. It is often the beginning of a new one. Because pain, when endured long enough, does not simply fade. It reshapes the one who carries it. And in that reshaping, a new kind of strength begins to emerge. One that does not rely on approval. One that does not seek acceptance. One that no longer fears rejection. Only silence. Only purpose. Only the steady rhythm of a life rebuilt far from the place it was broken. Time continued its steady march across the Northern Valley. Seasons changed in their usual rhythm. Snow returned to the peaks. Rivers swelled with spring melt. Hunting cycles came and went. And from the outside, the pack appeared stable, strong, organized, under control. But stability in a wolf territory is not always what it seems. Because beneath structure, there are forces that operate without permission. And when those forces shift, the first signs are rarely understood at the beginning. They begin quietly, almost imperceptibly. A patrol that returns later than expected. A hunting group that brings back fewer prey than usual. A border marker found disturbed without clear explanation. At first, these events are treated as isolated incidents, small disruptions in an otherwise functioning system. But over time, patterns begin to form. In the Northern Valley Pack, the first real concern came from the outer patrols. Reports of rogue wolves increasing near the eastern borders. Wolves not belonging to any recognized territory, moving in scattered groups, testing boundaries, observing from distance before disappearing again into the wilderness. Such behavior was not uncommon in the past, but the frequency began to change. Then the confidence of those rogues changed as well. They no longer retreated immediately when confronted. They lingered longer. They watched more closely, as if learning, as if adapting. Within the pack, discussions began to surface among warriors. At first quietly, then more openly. Something in the balance of the territory felt different. Not broken, not collapsed, but no longer stable in the way it once was. The Alpha was informed of each report. Alpha Kale maintained composure in response. He ordered additional patrols, increased border surveillance, strengthened defensive formations along key routes. From a strategic standpoint, his decisions were precise, methodical. But leadership is not only measured in commands. It is measured in outcomes. And outcomes began to shift in ways that could not be easily controlled. The forest itself seemed less predictable. Game became harder to track. Weather patterns interfered with migration routes. Hunting success rates declined in subtle increments that accumulated over time. None of these changes were dramatic enough to trigger immediate alarm. But together they created a growing sense of imbalance. Within the pack hierarchy, elders began to notice changes in energy during gatherings. Warriors returned from patrols with fewer answers than before. Some spoke of feeling watched from the tree lines. Others reported brief encounters with rogue wolves that disappeared too quickly to pursue. The uncertainty spread slowly, like a quiet tension beneath everyday life. And beneath it all, the Alpha began to experience something he had not encountered in many years. Difficulty maintaining absolute control over every aspect of the territory. Not due to weakness in authority, but due to the increasing unpredictability of the environment itself. Control in a pack is never static. It requires constant reinforcement. And when external pressure increases faster than internal stability can respond, even strong leadership begins to feel strain. Still, Kale remained composed. He had built his reputation on discipline, on measured decisions, on the belief that structure can contain disruption. But there are changes in a territory that do not respond to structure alone. As the months passed, rogue sightings became more frequent. No longer scattered, no longer hesitant. Groups were seen coordinating movements along the outer ridges, testing specific sections of the border repeatedly, probing weaknesses in patrol rotations, learning response patterns. This detail unsettled the warriors more than anything else, because rogues acting with coordination suggest something beyond survival instinct. They suggest adaptation, intelligence, planning. Within the council chambers of the pack, tension grew. Some argued for more aggressive border expansion. Others suggested relocation of vulnerable settlements. But the Alpha maintained a controlled approach. Avoid escalation. Observe before reacting. Preserve stability. Yet stability was already shifting beneath them. There were nights when patrols reported unusual silence in sections of the forest that were normally active. Silence that felt heavy rather than peaceful. As though even wildlife had adjusted its behavior. Not fleeing. Not hiding. But repositioning. As if the natural order itself was reorganizing in subtle ways. And in those same nights, some warriors reported feeling a presence they could not identify. Not visible. Not confrontational. Just awareness. Like standing at the edge of something vast without being able to see its shape. Reports like these were often dismissed as fatigue. Stress from extended patrol cycles. The psychological weight of increased responsibility. But they accumulated nonetheless. Until they could no longer be ignored entirely. The Northern Valley Pack had always relied on a clear understanding of its territory. Boundaries defined safety. Familiar paths ensured control. Predictability maintained order. But now, predictability was no longer consistent. And without predictability, even strong systems begin to question their own stability. At the center of it all, Alpha Kale continued to lead. Yet leadership in times of uncertainty carries a different weight. Decisions that once felt straightforward now required deeper consideration. Every action had consequences that extended further than before. And beneath that growing pressure, an unspoken question began to emerge within the pack. Not voiced openly, but felt collectively. Was the imbalance they were experiencing purely environmental? Or was it something tied to decisions made long before these changes began? Decisions that had altered more than one life. Decisions that had been believed final at the time they were made. Because when destiny is denied its natural course, the consequences do not always appear immediately. Sometimes they arrive slowly, in patterns, in disruptions, in shifts that cannot be traced back to a single origin. And in the Northern Valley Pack, those shifts were only beginning to reveal themselves. The balance had not collapsed. Not yet. But it was no longer still. And in the distance, beyond the borders of the pack's certainty, the forest continued to change in ways that no council meeting had yet fully understood. Because when destiny is rejected, balance does not simply hold. It responds. There are moments in the history of every pack that divide time itself into two separate truths. Before and after. Not because of prophecy. Not because of expectation. But because something returns that was never meant to be seen again in the same form. In the Northern Valley Pack, life had continued under a fragile sense of restored control. The Alpha still governed with precision. Patrols still maintained order along the borders. The alliance with Eastern Ridge remained intact. And the pack gatherings continued beneath the familiar rhythm of tradition. Yet beneath that surface of normality, something had already begun to shift in ways no council discussion could fully explain. Reports from the outer territories had not stopped. They had only become more structured, more deliberate. Rogue activity no longer appeared random. It moved with awareness of patrol timing, of territory rotation, of patterns that should have remained unknown to outsiders. Still, no direct confrontation had occurred that could be traced to a single source of threat. Only observation. Only pressure at the edges. Only a growing sense that the land surrounding the pack was no longer behaving as it once did. Within the leadership, the Alpha maintained focus on internal stability. The pack continued its routines. Training cycles. Hunting schedules. Council meetings. All functioning as expected. But expectations can become fragile when something unseen begins to shift the foundation beneath them. And then, without warning, the shift stopped being invisible. The pack meeting that day had been called for routine matters. Boundary reports. Resource allocation. Training evaluations. A gathering of structure and order. Hundreds of wolves assembled in the central clearing beneath the open sky. The Alpha stood upon the raised platform. Calm. Controlled. Observing the pack as they took their places. Nothing about the moment suggested disruption. Nothing indicated change. Until the wind moved differently. Not stronger. Not colder. Just different. A subtle pressure across the clearing that caused several wolves to pause mid-conversation. Heads turned instinctively toward the outer edge of the gathering space. Toward the forest line. At first, only a few noticed. Then more. Silence began to spread in irregular waves through the crowd. Not commanded. Not requested. Simply emerging on its own. As though something within the environment itself had altered the attention of every wolf present. And then she appeared. At the edge of the tree line. Standing still for a moment where forest shadow met open light. There was no announcement. No escort. No sound marking her arrival. Only presence. The pack did not recognize her immediately. Not because she was hidden. But because recognition required comparison to memory. And memory no longer matched what stood before them. She stepped forward. Slowly. Deliberately. Each movement measured not by hesitation. But by awareness. The clearing seemed to tighten around her presence as she entered. Not physically. But perceptually. As though space itself was adjusting to accommodate something that no longer belonged to its previous definition. Whispers began. Soft at first. Uncertain. Then spreading. Recognition surfaced in fragments. A name recalled from distant memory. A face half forgotten beneath years of assumed absence. The girl who had once collapsed at the base of the Alpha's platform. The one who had disappeared into the forest after rejection. But what stood before them now did not align with that memory. There was no trace of the fragile presence they once dismissed. No hesitation. No uncertainty. Only stillness shaped by something far more controlled. As she crossed the clearing, wolves instinctively stepped aside. Not ordered. Not instructed. But compelled by instinct. The Alpha remained on the platform. Watching. unmoving. At first, his expression remained composed, controlled. The same discipline he had maintained through years of leadership. But beneath that surface something shifted. Recognition arrived not through sight alone, but through instinct, the bond. It did not return gently. It struck awareness with clarity that could not be ignored. The same connection that had once been felt during the ceremony years before was present again, but it was no longer the same. It carried weight that had changed, depth that had expanded beyond its original form. Cale's gaze narrowed slightly. For the first time in many years, certainty wavered. Not in leadership, not in authority, but in understanding. Because what approached the platform was not the same presence that had once been rejected. Time had not erased the bond. It had altered it, refined it, deepened it in ways that could not be reversed or dismissed. The girl stopped at the base of the platform, and for a moment, no one spoke, no one moved. Even the wind seemed to pause. The pack waited without knowing what they were waiting for. Because encounters like this do not fit within known structure. They do not follow ceremony. They do not respect hierarchy. They simply arrive. The alpha descended one step from the platform, just enough to meet her level. Their eyes met. And in that exchange, something long buried beneath years of distance resurfaced. Not as it once was, but transformed. Stronger. Heavier. Unmistakable. Around them, the pack remained silent. Watching. Trying to understand what they were witnessing. But understanding would not come quickly. Because moments like this are not processed through logic alone. They are absorbed through instinct. Through recognition of something that defies explanation. The girl did not speak. Neither did the alpha. Words were not required yet. The bond had already spoken louder than any declaration could. And within the silence of the clearing, a realization began to form among those watching. What had returned was not a memory, not a ghost, not an echo of what once was. It was something continuing, something that had survived absence, and changed through it. The alpha finally exhaled slowly, a controlled breath that carried more weight than it revealed. Because what stood before him was no longer something he could categorize within the decisions he had made years ago. The rejection had not ended the connection. It had displaced it into something unfamiliar. Something that no longer fit the structure he had used to define his leadership. And beneath the attention of the entire pack, the past and present stood facing one another. Not as enemies, not as allies, but as 2 points in a timeline that had finally crossed again. And in that crossing, nothing would remain unchanged. In every leadership cycle within a wolf pack, there comes a moment when authority is no longer tested by outsiders, but by truth itself. A truth that does not arrive with warning. A truth that does not wait for readiness. It simply reveals itself when the conditions can no longer hide it. In the Northern Valley pack, that moment unfolded beneath an open sky filled with stillness. The clearing remained silent. Not empty, but suspended. Every wolf present understood, without speaking, that something irreversible had begun. The alpha stood a short distance from the platform now, closer to the center of the clearing than before, yet further from certainty than at any point in his leadership. He observed her carefully, not as he would observe a threat, not as he would observe a stranger, but as something familiar that had returned in a form he had not prepared for. Time does not erase bonds of this nature. It only changes how they are perceived. And perception is often the difference between recognition and denial. The girl stood still at the base of the platform. No urgency in her movement. No visible attempt to reclaim attention. She simply existed in that space as though she had never truly left it. As though the years between absence and return had been folded into silence. Cale's instincts responded before his thoughts could fully align. The bond was no longer uncertain. No longer faint. It was present in a form that carried depth beyond the moment of initial recognition. It pressed against his awareness with clarity that could not be dismissed. And within that clarity came something else. Understanding. Not emotional. Not immediate. But layered. The kind of understanding that forms slowly when memory and present reality collide. He had known the bond during the night of the ceremony years ago. He had felt its presence. Recognized its existence. And yet he had chosen otherwise. At that time, leadership had demanded alignment with strategy, with alliance, with the future he believed was necessary for the survival of the pack. But standing here now, something in that decision no longer fit the world in front of him. Because what he had once categorized as a rejected mate, was no longer recognizable under that definition. She was not weakened by absence, not diminished by time, not erased by rejection. Instead, she stood with a presence that carried something the pack had not seen before: controlled awareness, depth shaped by isolation, strength formed in environments without guidance or protection. Kale's gaze remained fixed on her, and in that moment, realization did not arrive as a sudden shock. It unfolded in stages. First, recognition of the bond. Then, recognition of change. Then, recognition of consequence. She was his mate. Not symbolically, not politically, not as part of strategy or alliance, but through the ancient connection that no structure of leadership could override. And yet, there was something else. Something that settled more quietly than the realization of the bond itself. She was no longer reaching toward him, no longer seeking confirmation, no longer waiting for acknowledgement. Her presence carried no expectation, no hope extended toward reconciliation, only awareness, only distance that had been shaped through time and experience. For the first time since the bond had revealed itself years ago, Kale understood something he had not allowed himself to fully consider. The rejection had not ended her connection to him, but it had changed her direction entirely. And that change could not be reversed by recognition alone. Around them, the pack remained frozen in observation. They sensed the shift without needing explanation. Wolves understand emotional transitions through instinct rather than language. And instinct now told them something was unfolding that went beyond ceremony, beyond hierarchy, beyond tradition. Kale took a slow step forward, not as an alpha issuing command, but as a wolf confronting truth. The space between them narrowed slightly, but the emotional distance did not, because distance is not measured in steps. It is measured in intention, and hers no longer aligned with the position she once held within his world. He studied her carefully, searching for familiarity within transformation, searching for the version of her that existed before the rejection. But what he saw instead was continuity without dependency, a self that had developed without reference to the pack that once defined her existence. That realization settled deeply, because it altered the meaning of everything that had come before. The bond had once been perceived as something he could accept or refuse, something within his control as alpha. But now, it no longer functioned within that framework. It existed independently of his authority, independently of his decision, and most importantly, independently of his desire. The understanding came slowly, but fully. She was his true Luna, not in potential, not in theory, but in reality that had been present even before rejection. She was the counterpart his leadership had unknowingly bypassed, the stabilizing force he had once dismissed in favor of strategy, the presence that could have shaped the pack differently had it been acknowledged at its origin. And yet, that realization carried no relief, because recognition does not repair distance created through time. He observed her expression again. There was no confusion in her gaze, no searching for validation, no visible fracture in her composure, only awareness of what had occurred between them, and acceptance of what it had created. Kale understood then something far more difficult than the truth of the bond itself. She did not want him. Not in the way she once might have. Not in the way the bond originally intended. That version of connection no longer existed within her direction. The realization did not arrive with emotional collapse. It arrived with silence. A silence heavier than any confrontation he had faced as alpha. Because wolves are trained to understand leadership challenges, to manage threats, to negotiate alliances. But they are not trained for moments where the past returns in a form that no longer belongs to them. She turned her gaze slightly away from him, not in disrespect, but in finality, as though acknowledging that what once connected them had completed a transformation that no longer required continuation. Kale remained still. The pack watched. The air between past and present held steady, and within that stillness, the alpha understood something that leadership had never prepared him for. Sometimes life delivers exactly what was once dismissed, only after the value of that moment has already changed its shape. And when it returns, it does not always return to remain. Moments of judgment in wolf history are rarely announced by force. They are revealed through silence. A silence that stretches across a space until every breath within it becomes noticeable. In the Northern Valley pack, that silence had now settled over the entire clearing. No wolf spoke. No wolf moved beyond what was necessary to remain standing. Even the wind seemed careful, as though uncertain whether to disturb what was unfolding beneath it. At the center of this silence stood the Alpha, and opposite him stood the one who had returned, not as a memory, not as a shadow of the past, but as a presence that had moved beyond the boundaries of what the pack once believed she could become. The bond between them remained unmistakable, unbroken in existence, even after years of separation and rejection. But bonds are not the only force that defines direction. Time shapes intention. Experience reshapes identity. And absence transforms expectation into something entirely different. The girl did not speak. She did not need to. Her presence alone communicated a clarity that the pack struggled to interpret. There was no urgency in her stance. No emotional pull toward the authority that once defined her place among them. Instead, there was stillness. The kind of stillness that forms when a being has already passed through the stages of attachment, pain, and release, and now observes the world without expectation of restoration. The Alpha remained focused on her, not as a ruler observing a subject, but as a wolf confronting a truth that no longer fit within the framework of his past decisions. The bond had returned, stronger than before, but altered by time in ways that could not be undone by recognition alone. The pack waited, not because they understood the situation, but because instinct told them something significant was unfolding at a level beyond normal leadership matters. Among wolves, such silence often precedes change. Not always immediate, but always important. The girl finally shifted her gaze slightly toward the gathered pack. Hundreds of wolves stood beneath the open sky. The same pack that had once witnessed her rejection. The same pack that had accepted the Alpha's decision without question. The same pack that had allowed her to disappear without pursuit. Now they watched her again. But their understanding of her no longer matched what stood before them. She had returned. Yet not as someone seeking restoration. Not as someone asking for acknowledgement. And not as someone dependent on recognition for identity. The Alpha took a slow step forward. Carefully. Measured. As though attempting to approach a moment that required precision rather than authority. But she did not mirror his movement. She did not retreat. She did not advance. She remained exactly where she stood, centered, present, detached from expectation. The distance between them was no longer physical. It was defined by transformation. And transformation does not reverse itself simply because recognition arrives too late. Within the silence of the clearing, something unspoken began to form among the pack. Not confusion alone, but realization that the dynamic they were witnessing did not belong to any known ritual. It was not a claiming, not a challenge, not a reconciliation. It existed outside those categories entirely. The Alpha's gaze remained fixed on her. In his mind, possibilities unfolded one after another. Paths that leadership typically considers when faced with disruption. Restoration of bond. Assertion of authority. Reaffirmation of alliance. But none of these options seemed to hold relevance in the space between them, because she was no longer operating within the structure that once defined her existence among the pack. She was observing it, evaluating it, standing outside of it, and that distinction changed everything. The girl finally spoke, not loudly, not with force, but with clarity that reached every corner of the clearing without need for elevation. Her voice carried no trace of uncertainty, no appeal, no lingering attachment. Only awareness, and with awareness came the weight of choice. The pack remained still, because choices made in such moments do not belong to individuals alone. They echo across entire systems of order. She had returned to the place that once defined her identity, but she did not return as someone seeking restoration. Instead, she stood at the intersection of three paths, each one carrying consequences beyond her alone. She could end what remained of the structure that had rejected her. Not through violence, but through the dismantling of what it meant for the pack to continue unchanged after what it had done. Or she could choose forgiveness, not as weakness, but as release from connection to a past that no longer held power over her direction. Or she could claim something far greater than either of those options. A position that no longer required approval from the pack that once defined her worth. A place not granted, but taken through recognition of what she had become beyond them. The Alpha understood, even without her saying it directly, that the moment was no longer about him. It was about what she had become in absence of the world that once shaped her, and what she intended to do with that transformation. The silence deepened. The pack waited without movement, not because they were instructed to, but because instinct recognized the weight of what was being decided. An instinct in moments like this overrides tradition. The girl lifted her gaze slightly toward the horizon beyond the clearing, as though acknowledging something larger than the pack itself. Something that had guided her through years of separation, survival, and change. And in that brief moment, the entire structure of the Northern Valley Pack stood suspended between what it had been and what it might become next. Because power does not simply belong to those who hold authority. Power reveals itself in those who survive what was meant to break them. And in this clearing, that truth had finally become undeniable. In the long history of wolf packs, there are moments that do not conclude with victory or defeat. They conclude with understanding. Not the kind of understanding that restores what was lost, but the kind that defines what can never be the same again. In the Northern Valley clearing, the air remained still after the final choice had been revealed. The Alpha stood motionless. The pack remained silent. And at the center of it all, the one who had returned stood with a calm that no longer required validation from anyone watching. Time, in that moment, felt suspended, as though the forest itself was listening for what would come next. The girl looked across the gathered wolves one final time. Not with anger. Not with longing. Not with uncertainty. But with clarity shaped by everything she had endured. Rejection. Survival. Isolation. Transformation. Each stage had removed something from her. Each stage had added something else. Until what remained was no longer defined by the pack that once named her. The bond still existed. It could be felt beneath the silence. A connection older than spoken law. But connection alone does not dictate direction. And for the first time since that night beneath the platform years ago, she no longer moved in response to it. She acknowledged it, and then released it from influence over her path. The Alpha watched her carefully. He understood now, more fully than before, that the decision he had made years ago did not end a story. It redirected it. And in that redirection, something irreversible had formed. Not hatred. Not revenge. But distance that could not be closed by recognition alone. The girl turned slightly toward the forest edge, where the boundary of the pack's world ended and the unknown began. There was no announcement, no dramatic farewell, no final confrontation, only movement, measured, certain. She began to walk, and with each step away from the center of the clearing, the weight of the pack's attention shifted behind her. Some wolves watched in silence. Others lowered their gaze. Not out of shame alone, but out of the realization that what they were witnessing could not be undone. The Alpha took one step forward, then stopped, because even authority has limits when faced with decisions that no longer belong to its structure. He did not call her back, not because he did not want to, but because he understood at last that calling her back would not change what she had become, and she no longer existed within the role he once defined for her. She reached the edge of the trees. The forest did not feel like exile to her anymore. It felt like continuity, a space where identity had been rebuilt beyond the reach of expectation. She paused there for a moment, just long enough for the pack to see her silhouette framed by the fading light of the clearing. Then she spoke one final time. Her voice carried gently across the space between them, not as command, not as warning, but as closure. She did not offer destruction. She did not demand correction. She did not return to claim what had been denied. Instead, she left behind something far more difficult for those who remained to process. Forgiveness. Not as reconciliation, but as release. A release that did not reopen the bond in the way the pack once imagined, but instead removed its hold over her future entirely. She turned away, and walked into the forest without looking back. The trees accepted her presence without resistance, as though they had been waiting for her return to that side of existence all along. Behind her, the clearing remained filled with silence. The Alpha stood where he was. The pack remained where they stood. And the structure of leadership that had once felt absolute now existed alongside a question that could not be easily answered. What does it mean to lose something? Not because it was taken, but because it outgrew the place it was once meant to belong? Time resumed its natural flow again. The forest returned to sound. But nothing in the clearing returned to what it had been before. Because some choices do not end a story. They redefine it. And the truth that remained, long after she disappeared beyond the trees, was simple in its weight. Some people lose the greatest thing in their lives. Not because fate denies them, but because they value the crown they wear, more than the soul standing quietly beside them.